This What's Working with Cam Marston podcast is brought to you courtesy of Michelob Ultra Beer.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed at the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. Glad you're on for another ride. This is the show and podcast that's designed to uncover the trends shaping the workplace, the workforce, and the marketplace around us for the benefit of Alabama businesses. I try to find people to come on the show who can talk about the trends in such a way that something they say will be helpful to us in our own businesses. I want you to take something out of these conversations that you can apply back at your own workplace. We got a couple of announcements before we get into the content, and we've got another advertiser coming on board statewide. As the show begins to develop a statewide footprint, these new types of organizations have become interested, and that's wonderful. We welcome Persons Services Corp. Buddy Persons has long been a friend of mine, and really, he's developed his father's company, I think it is, but he's developed it into something truly remarkable, and we will have him as a guest on the show. And Buddy has done a great job with it, and I'm excited for him, and I'm excited for us. Persons Services Corp is a general contractor, and I encourage you to find their website, personsservices.com, to take a look at what it is that they do. Also, I want you, for those people in the markets that we're relatively new in, that's Huntsville, Birmingham, and Montgomery, recognize that this show is also a podcast, and you can find it at what'sworkingcam.com, where you can see a list of the previous shows there as well. So what's on tap for today? There's no doubt. I mean, if I had said, let's say in March of 2020, prior to the pandemic really getting a toehold in our nation, if I had said in any presentation or on the air here that the workplace certainly has changed, everybody in the room and listening would agree. Well, to say that the workplace has changed in the 2 years since March of 2020 is an understatement. There's been more workplace change since COVID began than I think we've perhaps maybe ever seen in our lifetimes. It's just remarkable. And Bill Wasden was a guest of the show. Bill is a partner in Burr Foreman here in Mobile. Burr Foreman has offices across the state, which is one of the reasons I want him back, and Bill's expertise is employment law. He typically represents employers in any sort of employment issue or employee issue that they have. And Bill was a great guest on the show several years ago talking about the management do's and don'ts and what you're legally need to be wary of, et cetera. Well, I called him back and said, Bill, we'd love to have you back to talk a little bit about this new workforce because so many people are managing a remote workforce. What are the rules? What are the mistakes a manager can make in managing a remote workforce? What does he or she need to know that may have changed since March of 2020 about managing, particularly in this remote environment? And Bill and I are going to get into that in a moment when we get back from the break. Safe to say, though, that there are some unique changes, and one of which Bill and I will talk about, I hope, is the difference between an employee and a 1099 contractor. Because if I were to say to someone, hey, you can work from home and you can do it when you like or whatever, there's the kind of lends itself into a contractor environment. What are the rules between an employee and a contractor? What employers out there would love to say, hey, if you're going remote, then I'm going to turn you into a contractor. And what are the rules around that? There's been a lot of IRS insight, IRS pursuit of the difference between an employee and a contractor. And the IRS, under this current administration, is often making people more employee than contractor. We'll get into that when we get back from break. Prior to break, though, let me tell you about Sandifer Wealth Management. Retirement planning is a lifelong process and one that Sandifer Wealth Management can assist you in. Check out their website at sandiferwealth.com. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. When we come back from break, Bill Wasden with Burr Foreman. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate at the University of Alabama. Do you have an industrial or commercial construction project you're ready to make a reality? Person Services Corp is a diverse specialty contractor capable of tackling complex projects. They've won awards from Engineering News Record and the Association of General Contractors. If you're looking for a turnkey project management solution, advanced technologies, and skilled personnel you can trust, look no further than Persons Services Corp. Find out more at personsservices.com. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate at the University of Alabama. I'm in the studio today with Bill Wasden. I've asked him back to the studio. He and I were together about 3 years ago to talk about the new workplace with such a predominant number of remote workers. What are the challenges that managers need to be aware of? What are the challenges perhaps that workers need to be aware of? Bill, thank you for your time. Welcome back to What's Working.
Thank you for having me, Cam.
I remember our conversation last time was just full of pearls of wisdom that managers need to know, and I'm somewhat expecting the same. However, this new workforce full of remote workers may not, there may not be too much precedent set just yet for things that managers need to know. I'm very curious of your thoughts. Let's begin this way. What are the few things that managers of remote workers need to know? What is their new world, manager's world, looking like?
Well, Cam, it certainly has changed over the last 2 years, principally as a result of the circumstances that employers across the country and really throughout the world were encountering as a result of the pandemic. I think one way of looking at it would be if the 20th century and the first 20 years of the 21st century were the years of the employer, where all of the leverage was with the employer, the terms and conditions, the decision whether to offer benefits, keeping in mind that for the vast majority of that time, benefits were not a usual part of the employment contract. Then halfway through that period, health insurance began to be offered. Pension plans of one kind or another, whether the defined benefit or the alternative, begin to find their way in as additional incentives. And so now we have rolled forward into the year 2022 and the year 2021 before that, and we are now seeing the leverage shift to the employee. I mean, and this goes all the way down to the hospitality restaurant industry, where minimum wages have increased to, on average, well more than double the federally mandated minimum wage. So I like to think of the 21st century, the remaining 75 years or so that we have, is increasingly going to be the century of the employee.
It's interesting that you say it's going to be a century of the employee. Is it not just a result of the low unemployment right now? Or are you saying this unemployment rate of about 3% in the state of Alabama is going to continue for the next 75 years?
I'm thinking that what we're seeing is an increased realization on the part of employees, rank and file employees, exempt employees versus non-exempt, managerial versus non-managerial employees, is an increased realization of their value to the employer. And I don't think that's something that really manifested itself before the last 2 years. And so you're seeing an increased awareness of their role in their employer's business, their value to their employer. I have restaurant clients whose hourly wage employees are increasing their expectations and communicating those expectations to the owners and the managers, and they're having to take that seriously. And for the first time, I don't think that we've encountered that before.
So I know there are managers out there, business owners, that are waiting the return of the workplace to, let's say, March of 2020, when the pandemic was something we heard about going on in China, but it hadn't impacted us yet. Your hypothesis is that day will never return in our lifetime.
I don't believe that we're going to see a restoration of the status quo as it was 3 years ago.
There's no way to have this new wage structure without prices rising. Is this a reflection of a consumer prices rising, right? My pizza that once cost $12 is now going to cost $20. Is that reasonable to expect?
I think it's reasonable to expect that the cost of goods and services are going to continue to increase. The Wall Street Journal reported today and has been reporting for some time that inflation is here to stay. Yeah.
I saw the inflationary numbers and it was shocking. Well, let's get back to the managers, the people who are leading a remote workforce out there. What do they need to know? I think they feel the pinch, and I describe it as a pendulum swing. The pendulum is well in favor of the employee today. In the past, it was in favor of the employer. It's in the employees today. What do these managers need to know? They're aware of where the pendulum is, but what do they need to know about managing and leading a remote workforce?
Well, first, I think that the pendulum hasn't totally swung, but it certainly favors the increased weight being given to employee preferences than it did before. I think managers need to be prepared to demonstrate more flexibility with their employees. I think that when an employee requests the ability to be able to incorporate a substantial portion, if not the entire portion of their work week in a remote setting, employers need to, and the managers for the employers, need to seriously consider, do I actually need to have this employee physically present on my worksite premises? Can this employee perform his or her duties with the same level of quality in conformance with my expectations as his supervisor or his employer from a remote site, as opposed to being physically on site at the workplace premises? For employees whose primary duties involve interacting via the telephone and a computer workstation, in most situations, the employer will not have a strong basis to insist that employee be physically on site at their premises throughout the work week.
So the employer can say, I want you here. It is in that employer's right to do so. However, it may be a foolish thing to do if this is a valuable employee and he or she prefers to work at home. Is that correct?
That's correct. The employer's got to be able to demonstrate more flexibility in this day and age.
So it's not mandated that they be more flexible. It's prudent that they be more flexible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about, is it right for the employer to think we can expect a reduction in productivity? Now, my question is contrary to what I've heard, and that is that most people in a remote work environment continue to produce a volume of work equal to, if not greater than, when they were under the roof of the employer. But many employers, I'm certain, are thinking, golly, if I can't manage them, if I can't supervise them, then the volume of work is going to decrease because they're going to play with the dog a little bit. They're going to, take a walk around the block on a pretty day, whereas when they were under my roof, I could kind of manage that in some way. Is it right for employer to say, I'm going to have a reduced amount of work and that's just going to be the norm?
Statistically, the performance over the last 2 years has demonstrated that there is no drop-off in productivity. And the premise of your question was, if I can't manage or supervise them.
Right.
Well, that question implied, if I can't manage or supervise them in person, then should I expect a drop-off in productivity? And historically, over the last 2 years, the evidence indicates that's simply a flawed assumption.
Is there a way for an employer to mandate in the employee's home a workspace? In other words, yeah, we're going to let you work from home, but we need you committed to a workspace, not the computer on the kitchen table, but a room designated for this or a corner of the house designated. I guess what I'm trying to get at is what is the reach of the employer into that employee's remote work environment? Hourly, we need you between these hours, or we need you in a fixed place within your home where which is your home office. Is there anything like that possible?
Of course, it's possible, but I would not recommend that degree of micromanagement of the actual environmental factors in the home workplace or the remote workplace. I think most responsible employees are going to find that that's necessary anyway. Now, one caveat to that is if the employee is working with sensitive data and working with information that should be accessible and viewable only by that employee, then yes, you can and you should have a policy in place that as a condition of working remotely, you've got to be able to, that remote employee has got to be able to protect the confidentiality of the employer's information and the client's or customer's information. And that would include guidance such that they are working in a confined space, home office that can be secured, and that you've got to have protocols for locking your workstation so that it's not viewable during a break or whatever.
Yeah. When we come back from break, I want to talk to you about a story I've heard of an employee in a remote environment, and he or she was working full-time for 2 different companies, and each of those companies was unaware of that employee's other commitment. So if we predict something coming down the road of the employer saying, yes, you're now hired for my company, but I need you to tell me that we're the only full-time job that you have, or something like that. These are crazy stories, but I know they're in the back of minds of employers today. When we come back, we'll get into that. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. I'm in the studio today with Bill Wasden. He's an attorney, a partner with Burr Foreman, with offices in Montgomery, Birmingham, Nashville, Jackson, Mississippi, all over the Southeast. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed at the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Customer service never goes out of style. In fact, I think it's safe to say that customer service is more valuable and more important now more than ever. Hi, this is Cam Marston. One thing that my over 200 episodes of What's Working has taught me is how important customer service is to building and maintaining a thriving business. It's the growing need for customer service that's led me to partner with one of the state's leading customer service trainers to create our program called Delivering 5-Star Customer Service. Your team will get one 90-minute training session per month for 6 consecutive months. Each session builds on the skills learned the previous month, allowing your customer-facing teams to practice before moving on to the next lesson. And the 6 lessons address everything from appearance to electronic communications to conflict resolution to maintaining a service mindset. Our program travels and is delivered in person at your workplace, nothing virtual. You simply can't practice the level of the skills this course teaches virtually. For more information, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's schedule a time to talk. Remember, you have less to fear from outside competition than you do from discourtesy and bad service from inside your own company. Again, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's talk about your business. We're We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate at the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. Bill Wasden is a partner in the firm Burr Foreman with offices all over the Southeast. He was a guest on the show 3 years ago, and in that time, the workplace and the workforce has significantly changed. The pendulum has swung in the favor of the employee, in my opinion, and so many of my clients' opinions. And Bill has given us some insights into how we need to react to this in an intelligent way. Bill, prior to the break, I told you the story about an employee who was being employed full-time by two different companies, getting double dipping, if you will. And because those companies were unable to manage or see his or her behavior on a regular basis, neither knew about the other. Talk to me about that.
Well, that factual pattern, that scenario reflects, in my judgment, a supervisory failure. That employee should have been under an express policy that would have been memorialized in the offer letter, offer of employment to that employee when he or she started, requiring exclusivity that you hereby commit in exchange for the company's commitments, that you hereby commit to use your full-time best efforts in the furtherance of your duties and responsibilities on behalf of the company. Mm-hmm. So that's an exclusive relationship. If that employer did not have that understanding with the employee, then that employee may not be violating any policy or protocol. Now, prudence and common sense suggests that you would make your supervisor and your employer aware of that. But that is certainly a weakness in a remote work environment where you are not physically on site and physically able to supervise that particular employee. Now, if you, the employer, are like I said, typically these involves work that is being performed on a computer workstation through access through a reliable internet feed. If the company is providing the workstation, the laptop, typically, then there are controls that can be implemented in that regard. And use of that company's property through the laptop and its access to perform services for a third party, that's another violation, absent any commitment of exclusivity. So you can have some controls there. But the bottom line is, if you're not physically present and you are not adequately supervising that employee, you do lose an element of control and security that you would otherwise have when they're physically present in the workplace. You
represent more often than not, as I understand your bio, the employer. Is that correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
What are they asking you today? What are their issues and concerns and worries today that are new in the last 2 years?
Well, just yesterday, as a matter of fact, we received inquiries to revise an employer's employee policy manual and handbook concerning the very issues that we're discussing here this morning.
Yeah.
So you're actually on the cusp of recent developments that are affecting employers and creating concerns that they're requesting legal guidance on. So that's one of them. The pandemic produced a host of issues that really have diminished in significance with the recession of the pandemic circumstances. But so those were new, and primarily they were related to the PPP program, the leave, sick leave, vacation, how they interplayed with an employer's existing paid time off policies. Those issues have been dealt with. They're largely receding now. And so right now the remote workforce and management and supervision of the remote workforce are presenting the issues that are of most interest to employers.
Yeah, so this, you mentioned the employee handbook or the employee, what is the word you were, not handbook, but guidance or?
Employee policy manual.
Policy manual. And I'm sure, employee policy manuals are highly recommended for every workplace, but they're also something that the employer or the manager or the supervisor also often rolls their eyes at. Gosh, we have to do this. This is defense. This is HR. HR is where you go to get told no. That's the no department. Yet these handbooks, do you predict them, or policy books, do you predict that they are going to grow more valuable to employers down the road such that the employer now is really eager to utilize these policy manuals with employees due to this lack of direct supervisory relationship?
I think that the importance of that type of document has increased precisely because of the prevalence of remote work situations. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to get employees, and we're having employees that are more distant from the HR manager. They're not personally interacting with the HR manager other than via telephone or perhaps by Zoom or a video link of one kind or another, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Zoom. And so the employee policy manual and the rules and policies that are set forth in the manual, that's the living, breathing document that employee will have in their remote setting that is the expression of the employer's policies. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's increased in importance.
Yeah, I predict that it will. What about abuse reports? If employees are feeling in the traditional workplace, in the historical workplace, sexual harassment reports, employee abuse of any sort, do you foresee those diminishing as a result of this new work environment?
Well, to a certain extent, yes, because you will have increased distance from those who are prone to such excesses in behavior. Typically, those excesses in behavior, more likely than not, occurred in person, particularly in settings where you had a coworker that was physically proximate to the subject of the unwanted conduct. In terms of the conduct that was being expressed through other forms of communication, well, that's going to remain the same way it was. But if the individual is physically distant from coworkers, those kinds of conduct that have been problematic in the past or diminished because of the increased distance.
You're an attorney that represents employers in employee matters. Do you foresee your workload going down?
Oh, and as long as employers rely on employees, no.
No, it's going to stick around.
No.
So if I hired an employee and I said, I need you to do X, Y, Z, you can work from home. I'm not going to tell you when to do it. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I'm going to demand that these deadlines are met. At what point do we cross the line to become that person becoming a 1099 contractor versus an employee?
Under the current regulatory restrictions that are being imposed by both the U.S. Department of Labor as well as the Internal Revenue Service through payroll audits and things of that nature, I think that the reliance on the status of independent contractor is going to be greatly diminished. The Department of Labor and the Internal Revenue Service are increasingly disallowing that status. They're invalidating that status through regulatory rulings, through their audit processes. Typically, if the employer has the right to supervise that individual, whether they are actually supervising and controlling that individual's conduct or not, these federal agencies have found that they are, in fact, not an independent contractor. They are an employee with all the attendant obligations of the employer that may or may not have been complied with.
Define the right to supervise.
By contract, well, let's just put it this way: the factual circumstances that you outlined, where that manager gave objectives, performance objectives, and requirements to the remote worker, and then you ask, at what point does that individual become subject to being classified as an independent contractor? you are paying that individual to perform those duties. You're paying that individual to act in furtherance of the employer's objectives in delivery of products and or services. You have extended an offer of employment to that individual at some point in the past, and that individual is on your payroll. And these federal agencies have really stretched the definition of the right to control, whether you exercise that right of control or not, where in this case you chose not to. You're exercising control because you delivered mandatory performance objectives to this individual.
So if I deliver a deadline, let's say, and I had this conversation coming into this recording today in the car, I need you to do this to these documents and to have them delivered to me into my Dropbox folder by this date. But the document, and once that's done, the work is done. That my need for your work terminates at that point. It's a project. So how does that factor in this 1099 versus employer?
If it's a one-time project and this individual is not on your payroll, then you're edging more into the independence of the contractor relationship.
So I can make demands of the quality of the product, and I can make demands of the deadlines that are necessary to meet, and some subtleties within there. I need this converted to XYZ file upon delivery. No problem there.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay. So there are employers out there who I know would prefer many more of their employees on a contractor basis. You're telling me that they need to be very careful.
Absolutely.
And if they have 1099 contractors out there, they are vulnerable to what factors? Can you list for me some factors that would suggest if you're asking your contractors to do the following things, then the IRS could come in, audit your payroll, and say, no, that's an employee, and you owe us blank many years of payroll taxes. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So actually, we've got to go to break. Let's go to break, and when we come back, we'll kind of develop as we move along, a list of what those factors may be and how they may change in the future. You're listening to What's Working. In the studio today with Bill Wasden, an attorney with Burr Foreman here in Mobile. They have offices in Montgomery, Birmingham, Nashville, Jacksonville, all over the Southeast. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed at the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. Need a trustworthy contractor for your next big project? Person Services Corp has served clients with dedication to safety, quality, and performance since 1978. Headquartered in Mobile, Person Services Corp has offices in 5 southeastern states to meet your project demands, from industrial to commercial to disaster recovery to infrastructure. Person Services Corp has a project management team ready to make your project a success. Find more at personsservices.com. Listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is presented by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. I'm in the studio today with Bill Wasden, attorney of Burr Foreman. Let me read you a little bit about his bio here. He served as the general counsel and legal advisor to Governor Guy Hunt prior to joining Burr Foreman. He was also assistant attorney general in the office of the Alabama Attorney General. The man has some great expertise on the topic, as well as some roots throughout the state. Bill, prior to the break, we were going to put a little list together of things that employers need to be aware of that designates the difference between an employee and a 1099 contractor. Because if an employer is suddenly audited and the IRS says, no, they're an employee, it can be an expensive process. It can be an expensive judgment, can't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because it triggers all sorts of payroll tax obligations and similar factors that most employers are well aware of.
So let's begin the list. What does an employer need to know that will define the difference between the two categories?
Well, Cam, the Supreme Court has basically set out 7 factors, and these are commonsensical factors. There's no magic test. That's one reason why there's no bright line distinction that the vagary of which leads employers down the wrong path sometime. But things that the court has looked at and that the agencies have looked at are such things as, number one, the extent to which the services rendered are an integral part of the principal's business. I mean, I think before we started today, I was telling you about an instance where a client hospital had undergone a payroll audit, and the Internal Revenue Service took the unprecedented position, at least for that particular hospital, that the hospital's emergency room physicians should be classified as employees rather than independent contractors. Well, if you surveyed hospitals throughout the state of Alabama, you're going to find that in almost every instance that hospital treats its emergency room physicians who come in typically on the weekends and at night, in those situations anyway, as independent contractors, because they're typically working at multiple hospitals and multiple provider clinics. But the IRS said, no, you have the right to control them. They must have staff privileges at your hospital, so you have the right to control them, whether you actually are supervising them in the delivery of emergency room physician services or not. You have the right to do so. Those individuals are part and parcel of what you do as a hospital.
Yeah.
They're providing physician services. So that was the factor that the IRS was looking at. They look at the permanency of the relationship. Many employers will have somebody that's been classified as an independent contractor that has been performing services for them for a decade or more. Shouldn't that be an employee?
Yeah.
And that's what is frustrating about it, is that the regulatory agency, the IRS or the Department of Labor, are making business judgment decisions for the employer. Shouldn't that individual be an employee? We find that it should be classified as employee. Well, that employer has made a business judgment decision that favors independent contractor status for a variety of the usual reasons. The third factor, the amount of the alleged contractor's investment in facilities and equipment. Is the employer providing facilities or equipment, or is the independent contractor providing facilities and equipment? Mm-hmm. In the remote work situation that we're talking about, it's typically a mix.
Yeah.
The employer may provide the laptop, but the power, the lights, and everything else is being provided at the employee's home. So you get a mixed facts question. The nature and degree of control by the principal. In that case, it would be the employer. That's usually a variable fact situation. In the scenario you outlined, the employer is not providing day-to-day supervision over how the project is to be achieved and the end result delivered. Yeah. The amount of initiative, judgment, or foresight in open market competition with others required for success of the claimed independent contractor. That is such a vague concept that many lawyers don't know how to apply it, and most of the regulatory agencies just don't try to get into it. And finally, the degree of independent business organization and operation. Is the employer providing the whole package for that individual to perform those products and services, to deliver them? If so, it weighs in favor of employee status as opposed to independent contractor. At the same time, the regulatory agencies have taken a position, and courts have applied these factors or reviewed them as being immaterial in determining whether there's an employment relationship. Such facts as the place where the work is performed, the absence of a formal employment agreement, or whether an independent contractor is licensed by the state or local government in the jurisdiction where the services are being provided. They view those as immaterial.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. How much of this is political? How much of this, assuming there's a leadership change in Washington or a leadership change in Montgomery, how much of this is vulnerable to the political pendulum?
Not so much on the state level, but on the federal level, there is a lot of interplay with the political administration that's in office at that time. Uh-huh. The Department of Labor, for example, rescinded a rule after the Biden administration took office that would have been more employer-friendly, and in turn are promulgating rules that are more employee-friendly. Mm-hmm. The Department of Labor is an employee advocacy organization when it gets right down to it.
Right.
Department of Labor wants everybody under the big tent. They want everybody to have benefits, employee benefits. And so they're an employee advocacy regulatory agency, and there's nothing wrong with it. You just have to keep that in mind.
Right.
And so, yes, it does impact the policies and discretionary positions of the Department of Labor depending on the political administration that's in office.
This is a naive question. This reveals what I don't know. Does union factor into any of this at some point? Union memberships, pro-union. Do you foresee the unions trying to create a work-from-home union, just like they tried to unionize the Uber drivers back in the day?
Unionization is an entirely different scenario, and whether there's a collective bargaining unit in place, a union at any particular employer setting, a lot of the usual obligations, rights and responsibilities are altered by that contract. So that's going to depend on the impact of that, and the influence on the employer is going to depend on the contract and the bargaining unit obligations that are in place.
So we've seen a dramatic change in the past 2 years since the pandemic began. Where do you see this going? Take me 10 years down the road, and we'll look back to this conversation and say, yeah, you, Bill, predicted these changes and these changes happened. What's going to happen in the next 10 years?
I think that you're going to see a decreased demand for office space, physical office space. I know personally law firms that are operating with 30 to 40% physical occupancy on a day-to-day basis in their expensive settings. That doesn't include mine. I think we're here in Mobile, we're probably at 90+% occupancy on a day-to-day basis. I think that's primarily because we like to work with each other. We enjoy the collegiality. We enjoy the face-to-face interaction. But you do have a lot of businesses, law firms, and other office settings predominantly in larger metropolitan areas where they are way down. And I think that you're going to see a permanence of that trend now because of the cost of fuel and transportation. And that's another factor that is going to start playing into it.
Yeah, it's I filled up yesterday, and it was a shock to the system. And I'm trying to think, all right, how do I pass this on? As all these employers are having to do, how do we pass these new costs on down the chain? Ultimately, you and I, the consumer, are going to be paying for this.
It trickles down.
There's no way around it.
No way around it. Now, something we haven't mentioned, I think going back to risk that the employer needs to be mindful of.
Yeah.
Are wage and hour issues, Fair Labor Standards Act issues, the workday, overtime. You've got to be you got to have processes and systems in place to track that. And typically, most employers will have a log in, log out time management system that their employees are utilizing, which takes care of the documentation. But you've got to be careful about making demands outside of normal business hours that you have specified for your workforce.
And that's all a part of the employment contract.
That's correct.
That document says you're only going to work for us, and your primary business hours are going to be between the hours of blank and blank.
Yeah.
When you're going to be available to us to account for your activities, answer phone calls from me or whatever it may be, things of this nature. I'm beginning to realize that the employment contract is perhaps the most valuable document of all the ones that we've talked about. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and it's not a contract in the normal sense. It is the working relationship that you and that the employer and the employee has agreed to, Alabama is an at-will employment state, as you probably know, which means that an employee can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. An employee can be terminated for cause or no cause. And so the subscription to the terms of employment does not create a contract with that employee that is limited in the terms of termination, hiring, and firing. These are the rules. You understand the rules. They're being communicated to you. And in most of those officers of employment, the offer letters will not have any guarantee of contractual continued employment. As a matter of fact, most of them will have an explicit statement disclaiming that offer letter constitutes a contract of employment. But a clear written understanding of the terms and conditions under which an employee accepts employment with a given company or employer is crucial.
Yeah, sounds like it. Bill, how can people find you if they want to know more?
We're on the internet, Burr.com.
BURR.com. This is Bill Wasden, partner with Burr Foreman, offices across the state of Alabama. Bill, thank you so much. It's good to have you back.
Thank you for having me, Cam. It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back with segment 5 after this. And to wrap it up, you're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama College for Real Estate, housed at the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Hey, this is Billy Duran. I'm the president of Threaded Fasters. And when I'm not down at the Nut House, I'm listening to What's Working with Cam Marston. Now back to the show.
What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate at the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. Thanks to Bill Wasden for his time. I was not aware of the significance of the employment contract. Now, I am a very small business, and there are many of you out there likely that are aware of it, but the spelling out of the exact details of what this employment agreement includes, including work location and commitment to one employer, it sounds like this employment contract is key in so many workplaces, and I'm going to guess will continue to become or be a very, very important document going forward, especially as this continued remote work environment catches hold. You know, these privileges historically become entitlements. And you can think back to the days back in the day, I used to hear about summer office attire on Fridays. And then it became casual work weeks or casual workplace during the summer. And then it became casual workplace all the time. And now it's escalated again into remote work environments. It's important that we keep an eye on these trends, knowing that they're likely to become entitlements and how we need to deal with them. If they feel there's somebody who needs to hear this show, I want you to go to whatsworkingcam.com and find it and forward it on to them. That's where the podcast is housed. And at that location, you could subscribe to the podcast at any one of your favorite podcast sites. I hope you'll do so. If you do, please rate us. Those ratings matter a great deal. And I want you to find me on social media, Cam Marston. We do face and post and pin and tweet and Insta and all this kind of stuff. You may find me at Cam Marston, then the numeral 1. And you can follow us there, get updates on the show, and please email me directly and let me know your thoughts. Cam@cammarston.com. That's CAMMARSTON.com. Cam@cammarston.com. We'd love to hear from you. Always looking for ideas for new shows. What's Working focuses on the workplace, workforce, and marketplace trends that are impacting Alabama business. Show is produced by John Thompson with Ion Digital. We'll have another show next week. Have a good week, everybody.